and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host again for today, Simon Hodgkins, absolutely delighted to be joined by Alen Juginović. Alen is an absolute phenomenon. He's a medical doctor and a postdoc at Harvard Medical School. He works for the Department of Neurobiology. He's currently working, I know, in the field of sleep medicine, and also specifically with the effects that sleep has on sleep deprivation has on health. So he's held numerous scientific lectures throughout his career. I know he's organized award-winning projects such as the Nobel Laureate conference, where I think you had 4 Nobel Laureates, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely, Simon. Yeah.
Yeah. And Alen is also the author of a book called The Introduction to Sleep Medicine. This book, I know, it sort of focuses, doesn't it, on the physiology and the pathophysiology of sleep and the circadian rhythms.
Yeah, absolutely.
As well as sleep disorders. So, look, I think there's an awful lot in there, Alen. I'm dying to get into this interview. And I also want to mention, because as we record this, we've just finished year 5 of the Think Global Awards. And you were also a Think Global Award winner. And you've also, very recently, you were awarded the 2021 European Citizens Prize, which is given by the European Parliament.
Yeah, that's all true, and it's been a huge honor. Huge honor, both receiving both awards.
So look, we've got an awful lot to get through here. We've got the medical doctor, we've got your Harvard Medical School, what you're doing in the Department of Neurobiology, everything you're doing in sleep studies, obviously the awards that you've won. We have your book. There's a lot to talk about here. So let's move on and get on to the show. You're very welcome to the show, Alen. It's great to talk to you again.
Thank you very much, Simon, for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. So look, let's start with the career and the background. I'll give a little bit of an introduction there. Was this career choice, was it always the dream, the goal? And I don't use the dream, I haven't purposely said the dream because of the sleep studies.
I see the pun.
Thank you. Was it your goal though? Was that what you wanted to get into? Or how do you get into neurobiology? Because there's not many of us in the world of neurobiology.
Yeah. Look, going here to Harvard Medical School, I can't even say it was a dream because I couldn't dream of going here. Right. So it's like above some state above the dream. But yeah, neurobiology and neuroscience in general, I would say it's been my passion since almost the beginning of medical school. So it was like 7 years ago, I started being interested in neuroscience and neurobiology in general. And that all started with me having the course in neuroscience at medical school. And while we were having that course, which was relatively short, like a month, more or less, month and a half, I started getting interested in the brain and all the complexities the brain has, and the fact it's so under-researched. Like we know a lot about the brain, but yet there is so much more to know about the brain, and especially the sleep side of the brain, because we basically sleep a third of our lives. Well, we should sleep a third of our lives. Some people sleep less, some people sleep more. But that state is just so under-researched, and it's so interesting why we actually spend a third of our lives sleeping. And yes, so basically from my second year of medical school, out of 6 years of medical school, I started being interested in sleep medicine in general. And then my neuroscience career kind of took off from there when we founded the Neuroscience Society at the University of Split School of Medicine back in my hometown, Split, Croatia. We started organizing, as you said, all those like small lectures and everything, on a very local level. But then as the years went by, we started organizing, basically European and world congresses regarding practical knowledge for medical students, for dental students, and for pharmacy students who came to Split to improve their practical knowledge. And as you said, the Nobel Laureate conference.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about that. So thank you, because I mean, already from the student days, you're saying back in Croatia, but you did have extraordinary success back then because you organized these scientific conferences, right? And I mentioned in the introduction that you brought several of these sort of Nobel laureates back to your hometown.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just maybe unpack that a little bit for our listeners?
Yeah, for sure. So basically from 2017 to 2019, we've had overall 6 Nobel laureates, out of which 4 came to the Nobel Laureate Conference and 2 came to other conferences we organized. And that part of my kind of my professional, I would say, career, I would say still it has so many great memories. And the fact is, when we organize that stuff, and I should give huge credit to my team from Split. It's not that I organize it. It's like the team effort was incredible, because we basically showed that medical students, like 2nd, 3rd, 4th year medical students, 5th year medical students, could organize incredible conferences and bring these Nobel laureates with, I would say, with their passion and enthusiasm, more than some huge reputation or on a world level. To Split, which is not the biggest city in the world, it's a relatively small city on the but a beautiful city on the Croatian coast, and we showed that, and I feel like that part, showing people that young people can make a change, because those Nobel laureates had a huge impact on our community, both local and on a national level. It is one of the most important parts that I want to tell you, and it all started. When we invited a few Nobel laureates in 2018, hoping to get 1 Nobel laureate. And people told me, very, very senior people told me, oh, you're a student, it's not really possible. You can send the emails or call them, but, don't expect much. And I was like, I don't understand why these people are saying this. I mean, I don't understand why we can get the Nobel laureates, And, obviously we had huge amounts of luck and everything, but we got 1 Nobel laureate. And the interesting part is that some people didn't even believe he was coming until he actually landed in Split. They were like, oh yeah, well, he may cancel it, blah, blah, blah. But then he came. And then, after that year, next year, I told my team, look, why can't we make a Nobel laureate conference, just for them, and invite, several of them, 4, 5, 6 of them. And they were like, you're crazy, but let's do it. And I was like, cool, let's invite them. And people were, very senior people were also like, Troy, you got 1 Nobel laureate. I don't think you're going to get 4 or 5. And I was like, I don't understand why. I really don't understand why. And, it all turned out really well. We got 4 Nobel laureates. And one part which I would really like to emphasize is, we wanted the conference to be focused on inspiring and motivating young people, whether they're high school students or medical or other students. And we opened the conference. It was free for everybody. So we invited numerous high schools in our area, high school students and medical and other students to the conference. And we had more than 1,000 people. And it was just the joy of seeing young people, 15, 16, 20-year-old people who are learning and networking with these incredible people who change basically science. That's the most important part, I feel like, from our conference.
Well, congratulations, because that's outstanding. And sometimes all it takes is one person to say, why not?
I don't understand why not. There's a logo from a famous company, motto from a famous company. It says, impossible is nothing. And I really believe that. Impossible is nothing.
Yeah. No, fantastic. Well, listen, a lot of people that listen to VistaTalks are obviously, they're in the world of business as opposed to the world of medicine. We do have, people from life sciences sector for sure tuning in. But in the main, it's probably people from around the world. Maybe they've got an interest in language and linguistics. They could be producing global content. They could be in the world of business. But one thing they've all got in common is, particularly over the last couple of years with the pandemic that we find ourselves in and going through, sleep has become a real hot topic again. It's always been there in the background. People are looking after their mental health, or at least aware of their mental health, I should say, probably a little bit better than they were maybe in the past. And health and well-being has kind of been very much the thought process for lots of people, and considering what's important. But when it comes to your area of specialism, when it comes to sleep deprivation, particularly as it relates to business, because a lot of people can feel they've been working longer hours, we're all on Zoom calls, or we're on Microsoft Teams calls, or whatever the software is. But when it comes to sleep deprivation, what are your initial thoughts, or what could you share with us in terms of sleep deprivation?
Yeah, Sleep is such an important, yet it's sometimes such an important part of our lives, and people sometimes just neglect it, unfortunately. And I completely understand that people work a lot. I mean, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, the work schedule is sometimes expanded, and people work more. But I would really like to emphasize, and I'm going to tell you why, people should really try not to skip or cut on sleep time. For a few reasons. I can tell you that if you don't sleep well today or tomorrow or the next 5 days, yes, the concentration level is going to go down. Yes, the productivity levels are going to go down. That has been shown in multiple studies. But the thing I want to really drive home is long-term chronic poor sleep quality, meaning sleeping 4 hours or 5 hours for like years and years. That can elevate the risk of numerous disorders, cardiometabolic disorders, hypertension, stroke, heart attack, diabetes, and numerous others, which I don't even have to tell you here how many complications those diseases have per se. So that's the most important part, because I don't think it's worth not sleeping well today to do something more today, but then when you're 40 or 50, you have numerous health disorders, and you're not really capable of giving your max to work. And I completely understand also people who have startup companies that work 25 hours per day out of 24 hours per day. But I should really I hope some of those people are listening and should just take into account how important sleep is for business too. I mean, studies have shown also that people who sleep poorly lead poorly. There was a great article in Harvard Business Review about that. People who sleep poorly really do lead poorly, and poor leadership, we all know what can happen with a company who has poor leadership. And I know some of this may sound a bit, it's not going to happen to me. I function perfectly well with 5 hours of sleep. I feel like you think you function perfectly well with 5 hours of sleep or 4 hours of sleep because of the constant adrenaline or stress that you're into that keeps you awake. But I think you can see that stress connected with poor sleep quality, like that double, that thing there can hugely increase risks of multiple disorders in the future. So I would try to emphasize as much as possible for people to sleep at least 7 hours per day. Adults between 18 and 65 years of age, at least 7, and don't go below 6, please. I mean, yes, of course, one day for sure it can happen, but generally speaking, don't go below 6 hours.
Well, thank you. Very insightful comments there. And I was going to ask you that question because if I was listening to this in the audience, my immediate question would be, well, how many hours of sleep should I get? And I think of my own family member. One of my close family members is convinced they don't need sleep. That they don't need as many sleep. And you always hear about certain people in history who got away with 4 hours or 5 hours or 6 hours. And then you say, well, but then I also know people who, they could sleep for 10 or 11 hours. And, I just don't know how they do it. I'm quite envious. But you're saying that really between those sort of age brackets, about 7 hours is what you need from a
7-8 hours would be perfect. And also what I want to say is sleeping over 9 hours, over 10 hours per day is also not great.
Right.
So it's not only sleep deprivation that increases the risk of these disorders, it's also oversleeping. A study has shown in patients with cancer that actually sleeping more than 9 hours is also detrimental for their outcomes, for their survival. So that 7 to 9 hours is really kind of the golden bracket for sleeping. And what you referred to, 4 hours of sleep, I think you were maybe referring to Margaret Thatcher, who claimed that she could sleep I think 4 hours or 5 hours per night and lead the country, which is incredible. And there is some scientific evidence that in a very, very, very small percentage of people, there's this mutated gene that's called Thatcher gene, in remembrance basically of her, that actually makes people sleep that makes people sleep 4 or 5 hours per night, and that's enough for them. So there is very scientific evidence, but in a tiny percentage of people. For most of us, let's try to sleep 7-8 hours.
Yeah, and not try to convince ourselves that we have that gene, right?
Yeah.
We don't. We
Very
don't.
unlikely.
Yeah. No, it's amazing, and I see lots of people talking about, we remember to charge our smartwatch, or we remember to charge our smartphone and our laptop or whatever, but we sometimes neglect charging ourselves, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. And it is a bit sad that every time we have something to do, the first thing we cut on is sleep.
Yeah.
I would like it not to be the case. So
well, no, I think this is great to hear, because a lot of people are working. You mentioned, didn't you, that for some people the pandemic has actually lengthened the amount of time that they're working, because people are working remotely and working from home. The advantage is they're not commuting. Hopefully it's creating a better environment. They get to spend more time with their loved ones. But there's also the work creep, where it sort of over then spills into other areas of people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And in healthcare workers, we can also say that, a huge, thank you to all the, healthcare workers around the world who were on the front lines and still are on the front lines of the pandemic. I mean, the stress levels, anxiety levels, and, poor sleep quality among them is incredible. So yeah.
Yeah, there's an awful lot, depending on which country you're in and what media coverage you're listening to, but the general message coming out of the medical staff is that they're exhausted. It's tough.
It's very tough. Yeah.
So bringing it back to business for a moment, from your viewpoint, your vantage point, would you have any sort of ideas or thoughts around what an organization, a business can do or seek out to help manage maybe some of these problems that sleep deprivation can sort of cause? Like, is there anything an organization or a business should take into account or try to promote?
Yeah, I feel like, first of all, hiring people from the sleep field would be extremely, extremely valuable for businesses who can actually afford it. I feel like many businesses, especially in the US, can afford it. And the role of those people, the chief sleep officer, CSO, as we can say, is to promote and emphasize the necessity of sleep in everyday people's lives. And I feel like not a lot of people are informed about the long-term consequences of poor sleep quality. I think people do feel the effect of poor sleep tomorrow and the day after, but they don't think of it as something very systemic. Meaning, diabetes and all these disorders can be systemic in the end, because they can increase the risk of all sorts of disorders. I don't think anybody wants to have 10, underlying diseases at the age of 60 or 50. I think many people want to live longer and healthier. So those people, I think companies can actually promote sleep with their, among their workers, and actually think of the perspective. Have the perspective that after work and before work, give the people quality time to sleep. I don't think many people want at 7 a.m. Extremely stressful emails about this and that. Also, just one more thing that I can note. There's a great tool in Microsoft and Google email that you can schedule messages. Don't send extremely stressful messages at midnight. Why? Because stress is the number one cause of insomnia. Acute stress. Schedule it for tomorrow. I feel like people are not using this tool enough. And also, when work is done, when people get home, let them relax, because relaxation before sleep and not thinking about work and other stressful situations is extremely important for the quality of sleep. And what I want to emphasize, it's not just the quantity of sleep, 7-8 hours, it's the quality of sleep. People need to go through various sleep stages from 1 to 4, and REM, rapid eye movement, which is famous for dreaming and stuff. If they don't go through these sleep stages, if they don't get enough deep sleep, they're going to be tired the next morning. Their productivity is going to be lower, and it's going to have an effect long term on the business. So I would really advise, maybe I'm biased, maybe I'm not, hiring people who are from the sleep field to emphasize this, because people are working a third of the day, but they're also sleeping a third of the day. And nobody seems to really be caring about that.
It's very true. You've just made me think there as you were talking about, I do know one organization in the US who has a chief heart officer.
Okay.
Not in terms of physical heart
Mm-hmm.
health, but just, a different approach to a certain role. And I love the term chief sleep officer. I'm not aware of any chief sleep officers.
Me neither.
Maybe that's something that we should take in. And I think you're right. There's quite a lot of large global organizations who could, I wouldn't say easily, but could start to think about this in a realistic way to say, how do we improve the health and well-being of our employees? And something like a chief sleep officer, I think, would be very instrumental. I do know, and I'm sure you're more aware of these studies than I am, but there are a lot of offices where they've put in sleep pods that they became a little bit popular quite a number of years ago, to sort of encourage napping during the day. Whereas, when they came out, there was huge arguments about sleeping in the workplace. This is crazy. What's going on? And there's the other side of that argument, which is, of course, a quick 20-minute nap or a 10-minute nap or whatever it is, would make you much more productive. So
exactly. I don't think it just, in my experience, which is very little compared to people who run big companies, but just giving people the break, just giving people a small break can boost their productivity incredibly. So
well, that's wonderful to hear. I love that. I will be talking about a chief sleep officer to many people from this point on. So
please do. Let's hope this is the start.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is, let's talk a little bit about Harvard, because we mentioned that at the start as well, in terms of the Harvard Medical School. So I know you're there quite a while now at this stage, but I wanted to ask
2 years.
2 years, right? So I wanted to ask you a little bit about the medical work that you're doing there, the studies, the field, the stuff that you're involved in.
I mean, I can just tell you that 2017, I think it was 2017, the 2017 Nobel Prize was won for the discovery of the molecular mechanism of sleep, which was all done in fruit flies, in these tiny animals. And now we know more than the basics of the mechanisms, the molecules that control sleep, thanks to these tiny animals. And what we've used, so I work with fruit flies and mice. So mice are, I think, more familiar to people. So what we've shown in them is actually what my lab has shown in them, is that when you deprive fruit flies, so just the basic overview, fruit flies sleep just more or less like humans. During the day they're awake most of the time, but they also have like a siesta time during the day, and they sleep during the night. So it's more or less like humans. And we've shown that by depriving fruit flies of sleep almost completely, that the levels of a very harmful mechanism, which is called oxidative stress, is increased in the gut, in the intestines of fruit flies. Why is this important? Because when you think of sleep, I think 99% of people think of the brain, if you had to pick an organ, and not the gut, which is very, very logical. And we've shown that these levels of harmful oxidation only happen in the gut of fruit flies who are sleep deprived. And the point here is these fruit flies live less than 2 times, more than 2 times less than fruit flies who live normally, sleep normally. So it cuts their lifespan more than a half by depriving them of sleep, by depriving them of sleep, which is incredible. And we've shown this mechanism is conserved in mice. So in mice who are sleep deprived for only 2 days, and this is not in mice total sleep deprivation. This is like 60 to 70% deprivation, meaning they still sleep 35% of the time, which is more familiar to humans. That gut oxidation occurs only after 2 days. It's not that it occurs after 5 years. It only occurs after 2 days. And now what we're working on is we want to see if, and it's likely, I'm not saying it is, but it's likely conserved in other species, including humans too. And now we want to find biomarkers that we can detect that gut oxidation in humans to treat that gut oxidation, because we think since it already cuts the lifespan more than half in fruit flies, that gut oxidation may increase the risk of all these sleep-associated disorders, hypertension, diabetes, dementia, and all the rest. And by finding biomarkers for this, we can treat it timely and then potentially reduce the risk of these disorders. So yeah, that's what we're doing now.
That's an incredible study and incredible find from something as tiny as the fruit fly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for explaining that, because I just, when I came across it, I thought that's, the amount of information that you're pulling out of that study. And the other thing about, apart from, I suppose, the medical work, you're organizing the Hot Science Balloon Project, right?
Yeah.
What's the Hot Science Balloon Project?
Yeah. So we started, it's a funny name. We started a year and a half ago now, during the pandemic, I think April, May, 2020. And the idea of Hot Science Balloon is to connect science enthusiasts around the world, since we're still kind of in the midst of a pandemic. And conferences, yes, some of the conferences are being held live, but most of them are hybrid or virtual. We wanted to connect during the pandemic scientists around the world on one platform where they could network, talk to each other, form collaborations, despite not going to conferences. Because in my opinion, the best value from a conference is the networking part, at least from the biomedical conferences. Is the networking part. You meet incredible people there, and you can easily connect on a few topics and then collaborate in the future. So that's one part, connecting those scientists. The other part is we wanted to organize events with leading experts in the science and healthcare industry worldwide. And we wanted to do this by organizing interviews to basically find out how they discovered something or how they are leading some company or something else. And we had up to date 3 Nobel laureates. I think a week ago, I talked to Dr. John Halamka, who is the president of the Mayo Clinic platform, who is, which is an incredible digital platform from the Mayo Clinic, which is the leading hospital in the world. In a week, we have another doctor from AstraZeneca, who's the vice president for Europe and North America of AstraZeneca. And we're going to be talking about the pandemic, the opportunities, and the challenges of developing COVID-19 vaccines. And these events have been popular among our audience, and we continue on doing that.
It sounds really, really interesting. And it's incredible how that has adapted, because that sort of during the pandemic, where people maybe aren't meeting in person at a lot of events obviously moved to a virtual only situation. And yes, that sort of networking element, the face-to-face time, obviously has been significantly reduced and continues to be so in lots of countries.
Absolutely.
But it sounds like you're kind of developing that conversation through this new event. Yeah,
I mean, I have a great team of people. That's always important to mention. The team of people in Hot Science Balloon and other projects I'm doing are always people who are they're incredibly self-motivated and ambitious. And I always have this phrase and say they see more than a meter ahead of them. So the point of this is they're almost like visionaries. They see the next step and the step afterwards while we're still doing something else. And I love those people, and they're incredible.
No, it is amazing, and I'm always bowled over and impressed. I mean, we haven't probably connected in a couple of years, probably maybe a year and a bit since you last won a Think Global Award was probably the last time we spoke. And I know that your sort of engagement with Harvard and the studies that you're doing and the conferences that you're running, it's amazing how much progress is being made. And sometimes we don't focus on all the positives that are being done around the world. So it's really encouraging to hear all this fantastic work and networking and conferences and medical research that's going on here. But I did want to ask you before we wrap up today, because we're rapidly coming to the end of our time here, I know. I wanted to ask you if there's anything else you're involved in, because you mentioned there just a little moment ago about all the other projects that you're involved in. Is there anything else that you want to share that you think may be of interest to our listeners?
Yeah, for sure. I can share the current project. One of the current projects that we're doing, I think, is it's a multi-year project, and we're fully focused on it. And just to give a quick background, so Croatia, my home country, is experiencing, unfortunately, quite a big brain drain, meaning your young, talented, ambitious people, because of all sorts of reasons, are leaving the country, and it's not temporary. So that's the key thing there. I would say most of them are not really thinking of coming back to Croatia. And I've spoken to numerous of these people, from Japan to the US and across Europe, from all the countries in the world. And first of all, I've been surprised how many Croatian young, talented people are actually abroad working at incredible institutions in the STEM field. And just talking to them, I see some of the reasons why they don't want to return. But I see that at least a tiny potential of them returning to Croatia, and Croatia needs them so incredibly much. And that is why our team is currently basically at the initial to mid phase of this project, where we want to reverse the Croatian brain drain into brain gain. In the next few years, we want to bring these these people are just A level, A+ level of people from the STEM field. We want to return them back to Croatia after they finish their either education abroad or have gained enough experience abroad so they can contribute back to society. Because I don't think Croatia has an incredibly prosperous future unless these talented people stay in Croatia or return back to Croatia. And we're collaborating with the EU, the Croatian government and other institutions. And this is a huge effort. And I don't think this is going to be solved in a year or two, but at least laying the foundations now in the next couple of years in the form of a couple of conferences that we want to organize, and other collaborations with institutions, such as we want to create potentially new jobs that didn't exist before in Croatia, because some of these people who are from the STEM field, they do stuff abroad that is just impossible to do in Croatia, and we want to create fertile ground for them to return to continue doing their stuff, their work, fruitful work back in Croatia. So yeah, that's the project that we're doing now.
You don't take on small projects, do you, Alan?
I think life is too short, and somebody said, when you dream big. So
absolutely. And as we said at the start, why not? Why not?
Exactly. Why not?
It's very interesting. I was talking very recently to a gentleman called Mark Henry, who is the central marketing director for a government entity called Tourism Ireland, which is responsible obviously for attracting tourists to Ireland. But he's just wrote a book. It's just been published actually, called it's an optimist book. It's called In Fact, and it's about 100 really positive things that have happened in Ireland over the last 100 years. And like that, the Irish story was very similar. Obviously, people left for lots of reasons. But encouraging sort of the talent, the brain, as you call it, that brain drain that goes on when you lose a lot of your people, because maybe, as you're mentioning, some of the facilities may not be there, particularly the STEM and the medical environment that they need, which they can access abroad. And for governments and private investment to come together to build that infrastructure, to build that platform, so that talent can come back and bring that sort of knowledge and experience back to the country. And I know a lot of people, as they get older, tend to, not in all cases, but in some cases, tend to want to return, as they call it, home in inverted commas, and to give something back to the community and the country that they originated from. So I will be watching that project closely, because it's there's quite a few. I'm very, very lucky to be able to speak to people around the world. And there are a number of pockets where people are trying to get people back, whether it's economically, whether there's tax advantages to that, whether it's through housing, the cost of housing, whether it's through regenerating business areas, whether it's through the medical profession and STEM. And I also spoke to, not to prolong this, but I also spoke to a lady who I've known for almost 30 years called Mary Cahalan, who runs what used to be British Telecom, is now referred to BT globally, but the BT Young Scientist Exhibition. And that's like 100,000 people have gone through that program. and some of those young children go on to great careers in the medical and the STEM profession. But that had to be started, and it's almost taken 3 decades of the build for that, to sort of build that infrastructure and that sort of environment to grow the knowledge of STEM through, all children coming through the program. So
I mean, we can learn from other countries that try to implement or successfully implemented the foundations for these people returning. And it's I completely understand it's a huge effort. It's a multi-year, if not a decade long effort, but I do feel it's worth it. And because it's worth it, we're doing it. So.
Well, I wish you continued success. It has been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to catch up with you once again.
Thanks, Simon.
We hopefully won't leave it as long next time, but I know you're really, really busy. Today's episode, I hope for our listeners, has been a great, we've touched on everything from, sleep deprivation to looking after your own sleep and how it impacts your health and your life. We've talked about fruit flies and the studies and the learnings there. And, the fantastic work that you've done and continue to do at Harvard Medical, and also in terms of the Hot Science Balloon Project and all the other conferences, projects and studies that you're involved in. I don't know how you fit it all in, but thank you very much for talking to us today.
Thank you very much, Simon. It's been a great pleasure talking to you.
Well, look, that's the end of today's show with Alen Juginović. And it's been an absolute pleasure to catch up with him again. Please make sure to tune in once again to see and or listen to the next VistaTalks show, where once again we hope to be catching up with interesting people from all over the world. Thank you, Alen.
Thank you.